So I'd now like to introduce our three panel members to you, Sarah, Harley and Michael. So if you could just introduce yourselves, that would be great.
I'll go first. My name's Harley Dannett. I'm a lawyer with Hume Riverina Community Legal Service, and I've been employed as in a bushfire response position since September last year, with some funding from the Victorian government. So my role is really about increasing the access to free legal services for people in bushfire affected communities in northeast Victoria, largely in the Alpine and Upper Murray areas. Our legal service, HRCLS, has a much bigger catchment area, going really from the Upper Murray right through to Deniliquin in New South Wales and on both sides of the border. And yeah, happy to speak today during Law Week around some of the trends and issues that we've been seeing in bushfire response legal work.
Thanks, Harley. Michael?
You're on mute, Mick.
We'll start that again then. So my name's Michael. I'm the Regional Manager for Consumer Affairs Victoria for the Hume region. So many bushfire affected areas across the Hume region over the last couple of years. We have a number of team members who are available throughout the week that are able to provide a range of services and advice to people who have been affected in any way.
Thanks, Michael. And Sarah?
Yeah, hello everybody. So my name's Sarah Reid. I'm with the Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria, covering again the Hume region, so northeast of Victoria, based out of Wangaratta. Prior to that, I worked with Mick at Consumer Affairs, and before that, I worked for many years as a solicitor in private practice.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to our other hosts. So I might just get you all to explain now just what is a legal issue and how it differs from a dispute, and what different options of settlement are available.
Sure, and this really goes to the presentation today, because what we'll be discussing in more depth is that there's disputes, there's legal problems, and very often they're quite closely tied, and there's a good mixture between what is and isn't a legal issue. So I mean, at its core, a legal issue, and what a lawyer will advise on, what a community legal service lawyer such as myself would advise on, is really somebody's rights and obligations or responsibilities they have in relation to a particular issue based on whatever particular laws or regulations are in place. Sometimes that might be all of a dispute, and then sometimes there might be another component to the dispute that is perhaps not legal. People also come to community legal services or other legal services for help in relation to a question that they may feel that they don't know the answer to in their dealings with often a government department or a agency or a business. So the community legal centre approach is like all lawyers. We work with a particular client confidentially, and we take instructions from one client. We advise, and not in all cases, but where possible, we may act on that person's behalf in communication or in legal action. That leads us to looking for ways to resolve a dispute, and that's really where we again start to get tangled up with the other agency. So I'll pass over to Sarah and Michael just to talk about some of the other ways in which a dispute might be resolved other than in court.
Yeah, so I'll lead off with Consumer Affairs. So we have an advice service first and foremost. So we will encourage people who come to us who have an issue with a trader or with a product, and we'll give them hints and tips to be able to negotiate that back with that particular business, and give them hints and tips on how they might put that in writing or do that verbally. From there, if the person is not able to come up with an appropriate resolution, then we may enter into a conciliation with the business on their behalf, and we will talk to the business about what's going on, what's the nature of the dispute, and we'll start to think about some of the legislation that might be in place outlining people's rights and responsibilities, and also the business's rights and responsibilities, and hopefully bring the two parties together to gain an agreement. If that doesn't resolve itself, then we will then make a referral on to a different type of service. So it may be an advocacy service to assist the person to go to VCAT or one of the courts, or the person may choose to do that themselves. But of course, we've got the Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria who do things slightly different than what we do. So I'll pass over to Sarah, who can talk about that as well.
Thanks, Michael. So I guess with Harley's range of services and the legal, what you've got is getting some advice about rights, and then ultimately you may end up with a determination from a court. So a court listens to both sides and then decides what the outcome is. With Mick, they look at the legislation and within that context, help the parties try and reach an agreed resolution. Our role is basically where we assist the parties to resolve things themselves. So legal issues may come into it, and quite often we will ask people to suggest they get legal advice so they know what other options they've got, but it's purely about the parties themselves trying to negotiate a resolution that suits them, and they can do that with the assistance of legal advice or without, and they can find an outcome, I suppose, that suits them in particular, and may be very unique to their situation. So it's not imposed on them. They agree to the resolution that they come to, and they may do that by talking directly, sometimes with a bit of assistance and coaching from us, and sometimes by us providing a mediator who will formally assist the parties to have that discussion. So they don't tell the parties what to say or what the outcome's going to be, but they help them have a respectful conversation so the parties themselves can reach an agreement. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks so much to all of you there. So what we're going to do now is just to outline a broad case study, and I'll get our three panellists to reflect on how they might be able to help in this situation, and what legal issues and disputes might exist. So I'm just going to tell you the story of Simon. So Simon lives in a community that was heavily affected by the 2020 bushfires. His house was okay, but his bottom paddock, including some boundary fencing, along with a shed and some equipment, was burnt out. Simon's mostly retired now, but he would make some money selling cut firewood. Unfortunately, his wood splitting equipment was stored in the shed and was destroyed. The shed was insured, but not the equipment. After the fires, he received a small insurance payout and some grant money. Simon decides to use the money to upgrade his vehicle. After the fires, it's played on his mind just how important having a good vehicle is for safety. He goes to the nearest regional centre and trades in his old ute and gets a bigger, newer four-wheel drive, but still second-hand vehicle, handing over $20,000 on top of the trade-in that was valued at $5,000. 6 months later, the new vehicle is causing nothing but problems. It's been returned to the car yard 3 times to have a funny clunking noise looked at, each a 400-kilometre round trip. The first 2 times, the dealer said it was just a bearing, which was replaced at no cost. Simon eventually gets the vehicle checked out by his ex-mechanic mate, who identifies significant damage to the drive shaft, suspension and gearbox, and strongly recommends significant repairs. Simon puts this to the dealer, who denies that it's their responsibility and says that the damage must have been caused by Simon. To make matters worse, Simon's been arguing with his brother John. The wood splitting equipment was half his. It had been passed to them both after another brother had died 10 years ago without a will. Simon suspected that John was annoyed that he had been making money off the equipment, but had only ever made some comments. Now that it was destroyed, John is blaming Simon for not insuring the equipment and is saying he should have replaced the equipment instead of upgrading the vehicle. One night, John writes Simon an email saying he wants $1,000 for his half. Simon doubts it was worth that much, as it was in need of repair. Simon's now struggling financially from lost income, additional expenses with getting the new car fixed, and other rebuilding costs. He doesn't feel that he can ask anyone to borrow money. He knows that people know that he got a bushfire grant and that others have had it worse off. He sees an ad online offering a quick loan. He calls up and gets a $1,000 loan, planning to give the money to his brother John to get him off his case. But the next day his power bill arrives and the new four-wheel drive needs a tank of diesel, eating through much of the loan. Simon then rereads over his paperwork from the loan and realises that he now must pay back $1,800. So there's a bit going on there. So Harley, I might get you to start first and just identify the legal issues there.
Thanks for that, Margaret. Yeah, and it does seem like Simon's got a fairly complex situation. So whilst Simon's case study is a hypothetical one, there are some themes there that are fairly consistent and something that themes that we've seen across bushfire affected communities. And I note there's some other bushfire lawyers from across the country in the webinar at the moment, so hopefully they would agree that some of these things are common themes. So I guess there's two different ways of looking at themes and common issues in bushfire recovery legal matters. So I'm sort of going to split them up into both, I guess, themes that we might think of as a service and service provision, as well as the particular common legal issues. So, I think both are just as important as each other. So the actual direct legal issues, and then also just things that we need to think of both as a legal service and then as a community service. And there are many other professionals working in a bushfire recovery space, not necessarily doing legal work. So hopefully these themes are consistent there too. So some of the key sorts of things that we might see coming out of that, and you are welcome to make contributions in the chat if you think that you've spotted any key issues that you think need to be brought up. I mean, hopefully with the technology you might be able to get to them, but or they might be covered. So some of them are more contentious than others. So for a start, we've got here a consumer making some different consumer choices after the fire. This is something that we see quite a bit of. People are potentially needing to buy a new car, or having the money to buy a new car, update their car, engage with contractors and builders. These are different situations, and you've also got on top of that, you've got people in this recovery phase, often traumatised, making significant consumer decisions. So whilst there's nothing wrong with that, it can lead to an increase in consumer type legal matters, which I guess is different to what necessarily the initial sorts of issues that we think of when we think of a bushfire legal issue. We actually see some quite common legal issues, but with that heightened, sometimes heightened seriousness, or perhaps some different behaviour from the consumer, from the client. So in this case, obviously, we have a legal issue in relation to the purchase of the vehicle. And yeah, there's, I guess we might not have all of the information to be able to, at this stage, give Simon some complete legal advice around his car. But certainly some of the things that we would be looking at would be, despite the fact that it's a second-hand vehicle, we don't know exactly how many kilometres it's done, but given the price, it's probably done quite a few kilometres. But he still has paid quite a significant price. So irrespective of the dealer guarantees, he's also got some consumer guarantees under the Australian consumer law with regard to the vehicle being of acceptable quality. So in this sort of situation, we might get into a legal service would definitely contact the dealer, maybe put to the dealer that the vehicle wasn't of acceptable quality and that he has some consumer law rights. The Hume Riverina Legal Service would probably work with another fantastic community legal service, Consumer Action Law Centre in Melbourne. They might support us, but we'd be putting, we'd be representing Simon back to the dealer to say that possibly that this vehicle has a major failure and requires potentially a full refund. And then I guess there's some scope there in terms of whether or not the dealer's position that the damage was caused by Simon. There might be some scope where we need to get some more evidence around exactly when these issues arose and if they were in fact caused by Simon driving or were pre-existing. So just on the face of it, we won't go into it in much more depth now, although I think our Consumer Affairs Victoria expert might go into it a little bit further later on. Some of the other things that we might, and we might also, Sarah will also talk about whether or not this might be something that Dispute Settlement Centre Victoria would be the best place for a resolution, or possibly a resolution might be just being able to come to through direct advocacy. I guess if either of those things aren't successful, then there's the possibility of VCAT as a tribunal may be able to make a determination. Just getting back to maybe another service issue is, I mean, people who are bushfire affected are often living in remote areas, which isn't, I mean, people who live in remote areas have difficulties in access to justice, but where you've got a whole community that's in a remote area, you know, just the fact that he's had to make these numerous long trips into town just to keep dealing with this particular legal issue, without a doubt has a burden. It prevents people from accessing services because because of that burden, even prior to coming and getting help, just, you know, even taking a car into a car yard and those remoteness factors without a doubt come into play. Moving on to the his other issues with regard to his dispute with his brother. We'll discuss this further once Sarah sort of introduces how Dispute Settlement Centre Victoria might deal with this. But if we're thinking about this particular dispute with his brother around the ownership of the wood splitting equipment and machinery, you might have identified, maybe there is a legal issue there potentially in terms of a wills and estate issue, or who is the technical owner, what is their responsibilities, and I guess the short answer is that is without a doubt a very complicated and difficult and time-consuming area of law that for equipment that may be worth less than $1,000, it is very likely that thinking about that dispute from a legal point of view is going to be costly, time-consuming, and may not lead to a very quick or happy resolution. I'm not going to give an answer exactly. We don't have enough information in terms of what that position actually is, but we can identify that this is something that we would be strongly encouraging people to think about encouraging Simon to think about from a dispute settlement perspective. I hope that is people would agree with that. But having said that, this brings us to another bushfire related theme, which is with regard to preparedness. So there's a lot of talk about preparedness in the bushfire recovery space, and often we're talking about hazard reduction, burns, and you know the reality of fire in a preparedness setting. But this case study brings to light some things that we might think of as legal preparedness. So what we often see with in this recovery space is that these issues that haven't been dealt with for a long time, so I mean, this is a long-standing dispute around ownership. Post-fire, we've now got the dispute. So it's been sort of simmering away. No one's dealt with it. No one's really wanted to put their mind to exactly who owns this. And then now we're in this situation where it's come up, and so we began to see that as a theme in this recovery space. And then I guess the other key issue with preparedness that you might have picked up from the case study is insurance. So whether or not Simon's insurance was adequate, whether or not he'd even looked at whether the equipment was insured or whether he should. He may have just been paying his premiums for a number of years and not thought about it at all. So again, that's a preparedness that had he turned his mind to it prior to the disaster, might have been in a better position. So without a doubt, that's not playing. Preparedness is not a blame game at all. It's about taking what we can learn from this disaster and being ready for the inevitable next one. You might have raised some questions around. You might have thought that there might be some questions about his insurance payment, and that would be something that perhaps Simon may have wanted to look at as well. There wasn't enough information in the case study to indicate that there was a problem with it, but we would encourage him to think, and we would look at the detail of what this payout that he did receive was it what he was entitled to. That's kind of the more sort of classic bushfire legal issue. There's just a few more points that we just want to bring up towards the end of that there in terms of responsible lending. It's wanting to always plug this issue. There's some proposed changes to responsible lending, which Hume Riverina Legal Service is with its supporters opposed to. But even with the responsible lending laws that we have, we would be looking at whether or not that loan was suitable, but then so there's, I guess, a particular issue there. That's something that community legal centres do look at. And then the final point there, just to also add in terms of why Simon might be getting a payday loan to pay off a utility bill. We would be encouraging Simon to work with his utility provider around hardship rather than necessarily look at a payday loan. And that's where we really work with financial counsellors, and there's a lot of some fantastic financial counsellors that we work with, and they do a lot of great work in that space as well as legal services. So that's yeah. So there's a mixture of both legal topics there and also themes and service. So questions for service provision around working with people in this post-disaster and recovery context. So I will hand it back to Margaret, or
yeah, thanks, Harley. Yes, lots of great information there. So we might throw over to Michael now, just to put a Consumer Affairs Victoria lens over the case study and talk about how they might be able to help.
Thanks, Margaret, and thanks, Harley, for that introduction about the legal issues and everything there. And I agree with you that this is reasonably complex, and it makes interesting reading, but we also don't have a lot of information. So one of the first things that Consumer Affairs would be doing, understanding that Simon is probably in a fairly confused or emotional state by having all of these things going on all at the one time, is that we would be looking at what supports he has around him and looking at the ways that we can get further information. So we would see whether or not he's linked in with things like Bushfire Recovery Victoria or one of the other community agencies, because we would be wanting to see the second-hand vehicle contract of sale and things like that. Fairly concerning that a vehicle that is valued somewhere in the $25,000 range is having problems straight away. And we would be wanting to look at that contract to see exactly what that contract of sale was, first of all, roadworthy documentation and those sorts of things, so that we can start putting together a plan about how we would contact the dealer and talk to the dealer about whether or not the vehicle was fit for purpose, whether or not it met the description of what was advertised in the first place. And we would be looking at whether or not the best thing for Simon would be for him to get some form of a refund, partial refund, or whether the dealer still needed to do some work to put him back into a place that he should have been. I've got a number of questions that I have that I'd be talking to Simon about in regards to having to take it back and a 400-kilometre round trip. Whilst we look at the Licensed Motor Car Traders Act, and a licensed motor car trader is specifically required to do things, we also, as Harley mentioned, we also look at the Australian Consumer Law and Fair Trading Act. And in that, there is a general expectation that a consumer takes goods back to the trader at their own cost. But there is also a section in the ACL that says that it is if it's unreasonable or it's difficult to do so, that the trader should actually provide assistance to the consumer. So that may be, because it's a 400-kilometre round trip, that the trader should in fact be bearing some of the costs in partnership with Simon, and we would be once again looking to Simon to find out some details around that. We would be looking at whether or not it's a major failure or whether it's a minor failure as part of our conversations with the dealer. And if it was just a bearing or something fairly simple, it may have originally been seen as a minor failure. But the Australian Consumer Law indicates now that if there has been 2 or more attempts at fixing something, and something reasonably similar on a vehicle, it becomes a major failure, and the consumer could be entitled to a full refund and possibly even any consequential loss, which would then mean any other costs that Simon has incurred during the time that he's owned the vehicle. We would also be looking at whether or not when the dealer says that it's not their responsibility and it's damage that's been caused by Simon, we'd also be looking at whether or not the damage has been made worse by the fact that it hasn't been picked up sooner. So if the dealer has actually had the opportunity to look at something and hasn't diagnosed it correctly, has that meant that there's been further damage caused to the vehicle, which the dealer should have picked up because they're the expert in the situation, not Simon. So as you can see, a vehicle complaint can be a fairly complex one. And from there, once we gather all of that information, and some of that may actually be us contacting a dealer and seeing whether or not we can get a motor mechanic or licensed dealer to provide us with some expert advice as to the vehicle, and that may be that Simon may need to take the vehicle to that business and get a second opinion. We would then offer with Simon to negotiate directly with the dealer in regards to what can be the outcome, and we would then help to negotiate that backwards and forwards with Simon and the dealer in what we call that conciliation process. We would be reminding the dealer that they have not only the Licensed Motor Car Traders Act, but also the Australian Consumer Law and Fair Trading Act that they must comply with. And we would be pointing out those key parts that they may wish to consider before they make any offers or reject any offers that Simon makes. From there, if we couldn't come to an agreement, then Simon obviously would be given advice in regards to what his rights are in regards to going to VCAT and seeking a determination. And at the same time, we would talk to the trader in regards to what may occur if the consumer decides to take that to VCAT, and the time that they would be required to spend putting together the evidence that they would need to defend that. And quite often that sometimes brings the dealer back to the table and helps them to consider other options that they might not have thought about previously. Because really nobody enjoys having to go to VCAT. That may then mean that we do a referral to one of the legal services or advocacy programs to assist Simon to put together a VCAT case. I'm looking at all of the other things, and I won't go into too much detail, but certainly we would be looking at the payday loan and things like that. And we would be making other referrals to financial counselling services as well. As soon as we spoke to Simon with financial counsellors that are funded by Consumer Affairs Victoria through a number of different agencies. And once again, because we've had knowledge of bushfires and Bushfire Recovery Victoria, we would be looking at referrals to Bushfire Recovery Victoria staff and the networks that they have to assist people to work through all of those sorts of things. And handing back to Margaret, possibly a referral to Sarah and her team within DSCV for some of that personal stuff that's talked about in regards to the equipment.
Great, thanks Michael, and thanks Harley. So Sarah, how would the Dispute Settlement Centre approach some of the things raised in this case study?
Okay, so I think what Harley and Michael have spoken about, obviously in terms of the legal context, there's quite a lot of complications in there. I guess we would start by asking for more information, but in a different sense, perhaps to Harley and Michael. So we would just be asking Simon to have a talk to us on the phone or face-to-face if we could do it, and tell us what's going on for him. So when I look at the little diagram of poor Simon holding up all these worries in the world, one of the things that struck me is one of the steps he has taken, a positive step, is to get himself some money to pay out his brother. So I'd be wanting to find out from him what was important to him, because to me, having read that, I wonder whether keeping the relationship with his brother is something that's really important. So we would start by talking to the person, just getting them to tell us what's going on for them, what's important to them, and what their, the worries they most want off their mind, I suppose, are. If we take the estate example, so perhaps he does want, to improve or maintain a relationship with his brother, there is potentially a legal option, but as Harley said, it could be expensive and complicated. And what court does tend to do is it actually puts parties against each other. It's not going to help build the relationship or mend it. So in our case, what we would be saying to him is, well, there is an option for us to contact the brother and see if he's prepared to be participating in a mediation and discuss the situation. And some of that might be Simon trying to give his brother a bit of an understanding of all the things that are going on for him. A lot of those things wouldn't be relevant in an estate case. So while it's there is a huge impact, for example, on people of remoteness, for example, that's not something that would be dealt with in the estate case. A lot of things that are very important and weigh on people's minds are things that don't necessarily get taken into account in terms of evidence in legal proceedings. But in a mediation, you can talk about those things and explain the context and explain the pressures you're under in as much detail as you want to share. And that may then allow the parties to find a way forward. Because if the brother, for example, has just heard on the grapevine, oh, he got some money and he hasn't given any to me, the brother who's a bit put out is going to be thinking, well, hang on, that's not very fair. But if he starts to understand the pressures that Simon was under and how he was feeling at the time, it might put a different lens on it and he may actually see a different way of proceeding. The same with the car issue. So potentially we could look at seeing whether the car dealership would talk to us. Historically, I would have to say we probably don't have a lot of success with those types of businesses, but there's no harm in trying. If they tell us no, well, you've still got all the legal options there, but if they're prepared to have that discussion, again, it's the context, isn't it? So they might say, well, you know, we don't think we've done anything wrong, but if they understand a bit more about Simon's situation, they might be prepared to actually say, well, even though we don't think we've done anything wrong, let's see if we can help this guy out. And you can actually get some pretty creative solutions, you know. So could they swap the car for something else? It doesn't have to be an all or nothing, or specifically, you know, a refund or no refund situation. There's a lot more scope to come up with another plan of action that suits both parties. It's also a process where blame isn't necessarily being assigned. We're trying to understand Simon's situation. We're trying to understand the other person's situation, whether it's the dealer, whether it's the brother or someone else. And from that, with a bit more understanding, there may be solutions that have presented themselves that you can find from there. So our process, as in the dot points that are up there, very simple, no forms, no paperwork, just tell us about the situation. At the moment, we're doing a lot of the mediations by phone. So again, potentially no need to travel. You can do it from home. If you go to court, court is a public forum. Anyone could be sitting in on the court case. Mediation is private. You can sort things out between yourselves. You don't have to have the, you know, anyone who's interested in seeing what's going on at the local court hearing about it. It also allows you to get to those real issues that are under there. So what are the actual issues? What's the real concern that the brother's got? Is it that he was feeling that somehow Simon didn't consult him? Because it might be, for example, that if Simon explains why that didn't happen, he just got caught up, life got away from him, he really wanted to get his brother involved and he's really sorry he didn't. That might actually be all it takes to resolve that issue and to have his brother really change the situation that he's in. In terms of the consumer issues, again, there's a lot of complications. So Harley and Simon have talked about, Harley and Michael have talked about, you know, VCAT, for example. Again, if we could get the right person to a mediation, someone with appropriate authority, there might be an ability to reach an agreement. So we would look at who needs to be involved, what level they need to be involved at. It's no use, for example, with the car one talking to the salesperson, we probably need the owner of the business to be making decisions. So depending on whether we can get them involved or not, our way of proceeding with things might well be easier for Simon and may give him a much better outcome and a much quicker outcome than potentially court or VCAT. And it will also allow him to really put forward what is important to him. So again, at VCAT, if you were talking about the impact of the car not working, generally what you'd be looking at is, well, what did that cost? You know, how much did you lose wages by not working because you were having to take the car backwards and forwards? You may not be able to show that if he's self-employed, but in a mediation, the person can really get an understanding of exactly what a massive impact this has had for Simon. So it's a very easy process. There's no harm, we would suggest, generally in trying it, because if it doesn't work or the other person doesn't want to participate, you can always go on with the other processes, but it may well be simpler and quicker than any of the other legal options that are there. And it can cover a lot more than legal options can, because they're divided up into corridors, so to speak. You go to VCAT for this, for the estate matter, you'd go to court. You don't necessarily get everything at the one place. Essentially, I think we do work very closely quite often with legal services, such as with Harley and Hume Riverina Community Legal Service, and also with Consumer Affairs. But between us, it's about trying to pick the right process for the issue and also the person involved. And that's probably where we can perhaps fill some of the gaps or deal with some of the issues that have impediments for someone in Simon's situation in terms of the legal process. So I think that's probably throw back to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and our other panellists. Do either of you, Harley or Michael, have any other remarks you'd like to make there after we've heard everyone speak? Or otherwise, we might throw over now to some questions if anyone has any, and could submit via our question and answer function there. I'll just ask a question. So Sarah, say for example, my dispute is with a government entity or a local government or a service provider. Can Dispute Settlement Centre assist with those kind of disputes?
So the answer, yes, is potentially yes. We get quite a lot of people contacting us, and as they're talking to us, they might be talking about a particular dispute, but what becomes clear as you go through it is that in a way the dispute has become secondary. It's now the response that they've got or not got from the government department or the agency that they're actually really concerned about, how they've been treated. So we do from time to time contact agencies or government departments on behalf of parties who've got issues with them, and we do hold mediations. We obviously have to think about whether the person will feel that it's sufficiently independent. So we are part of the Department of Justice. We actually operate as mediators very independently. We don't report to anyone on the content of the mediation, and we don't take direction from anyone, but still there might be a perception, well, you're the Department of Justice and this is another department that we're dealing with. So if the person didn't feel comfortable, we would try and find another alternative for them. There may also be other appropriate avenues. So again, we would say to people, well, we could write to that department, for example, but there's also the option, for example, of someone like Ombudsman Victoria. So it's an ombudsman that deals with government departments and agencies and is independent and reports directly to Parliament. So we would try and offer what options there were and then allow the person to select the one that they were most comfortable with. But yes, short answer is potentially if the person wanted us to, we could do that.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that.
And Marg, from a Consumer Affairs Victoria point of view, we can also deal with government departments at times. The obvious one is when the person is a renter through the Ministry or Office of Housing. We have constant conversations with officers across the Hume region about people who are renting. But as Sarah said, it's about offering choice to people and options. So, you know, if it is a government department and it's not about a consumer type issue, it may be that we make referrals through to Ombudsman services and other complaint mechanisms where they can be given a fair hearing and have whatever it is reviewed, or they an appeal process or something like that. So we, once again, what Sarah said, we work really closely together and we often bounce a scenario around and we go, that's not something that we'd heard about or thought about before, and we come up with those different options for people.
Great, thanks very much for that. So Harley, what other sources of help are there for bushfire victims in terms of legal services apart from your service?
Yeah, great question. So I'm up here in Wodonga and travelling up to the regions, but I'm actually supported with by a really great network of free legal services across the state, and we communicate with New South Wales as well, but really across the state there is there's a network of other community legal services that are specialists. So Consumer Action Law Centre, Social Security Rights Victoria specialise in Centrelink matters, Tenants Victoria with regards to tenancy matters, and also the Women's Legal Service. And there's also another CLC located in East Gippsland, also working with communities there. We also have Victoria Legal Aid, they run Disaster Legal Help, which is a 1-800 number for legal advice. We're also supported by private law firms, both locally and nationally. So yeah, there's certainly more services out there than people often realise. And yeah, we always encourage individuals to, even though, I mean, it's unfortunate that we often have to say to people, look, I'm going to talk to you about referring your matter to a specialist who might be elsewhere, but we always encourage people to walk through the door or pick up the phone, even if they think it's too big and too complex. We can usually find somebody that can help. So yeah, absolutely work within a team, and that's just within legal services, as talked about earlier, financial counsellors and all of the other agencies we've talked about.
Excellent, thanks for that, Harley. So just in terms of all of you, what are your top tips for dealing directly with the person for whom you might be having a dispute or an issue with initially before you seek help? So, not sure who wants to start.
Sorry,
Well,
was that before they seek help, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
First and foremost, and especially when it comes to, you know, these types of situations where emotions are running high and all of that sort of stuff, we try and say to people, you know, where possible, try and remain as calm as possible. Obviously, we provide that same advice to businesses that they're dealing with. Because the calmer that they can be, and that will help them to explain their situation, etc. Sometimes that's they may show emotions, and that's perfectly understandable and all of those sorts of things. But where they get frustrated and they start to become angry because people aren't listening and those sorts of things, does become counterintuitive.
And I guess we, from our point of view, would certainly agree, although I would also say that, I mean, emotions aren't necessarily something to be ashamed of. If you're feeling emotional, and quite often in, you know, situations where you're trying to negotiate something or trying to get something sorted out, you do, that's valuable information to tell you that there is something very important there. And so you should, you know, try and have a think about, well, what is it that is so important? Why do I feel like this? Hard to do while you're actually having the conversation. I guess picking the right time and place to have a conversation with the other party is the first step. Obviously, you know, if for example, it's a concern where a neighbour's allowing, for example, a fire hazard to develop on their property, and you're thinking, oh, you know, the next season's coming around, I'm pretty uncomfortable about this. Talking to them about it as they're trying to get the kids in the car to go to school is not the time to do it. So try to find an appropriate time. Even if you say, look, I'd like to have a chat at some stage, let me know, you know, when you can do that. Secondly, trying to put to them your situation without blame. So you might think, you know, they are the most terrible people in the world, but generally, if you start to tell people that they're at fault, their back comes up straight away. So it's trying to explain to them, well, look, this is the situation I'm in. What can you do to try and help me out here? Give them, I suppose, a graceful way out, because at the end of the day, if what's really important is fixing the situation, it may not matter whether they actually agree they've done the wrong thing or not. What's really important is how you're going to fix it and whether that solution is suitable for you. So trying to give them that way out, and trying to understand their point of view. Quite often, you know, if we take the car situation here, you might have a car dealer who's been pushed to the limit due to, you know, rent rises and issues with other, you know, staff, for example. They're struggling as a small business person to make a living. That doesn't help Simon, but it might help him understand why they're reluctant to do a particular thing. So again, understanding the context is very important. And if you don't think you can have that conversation without getting too emotional, without applying blame, then that's when we'd say to you, think about getting someone else involved, independent, such as us, where again, it's not about blame apportionment, it's trying to find a solution. So that solution seeking state of mind, I suppose, is what you're hoping to achieve.
Great.
Harley, did you?
My 2 cents are, and look, way back at the start of this webinar, I might have made it sound like we're taking every matter off all the way to the High Court, and that's absolutely not the case. But way back at the start, far often, more often than not, the advice the thing I say to people is, look, before you've even decided that you want to launch into a dispute, because people aren't sure, they don't know if I'm really ready to take this on. I've been through a lot. Do I really want to do this? We say to people, why don't you just work out where you stand? So, you know, and that's what we find ourselves doing more often than not, is really just beginning by saying, well, look, either get some advice or do your own research, or, you know, shop around for your advice. That's fine too, and work out where you stand. So then you're going into a dispute knowing, knowing what your options are and what your chances of success are. So that's really, and there really is those resources out there for people to get that key piece of information. And then, yeah, people can make up their minds, you know, about what they want to do once sort of informed. So that's our key message: is pick up the phone and find out where you stand.
Great.
Harley, it's a really good point that you make about, you know, not going to the High Court and things like that. We often have people who come to us who are really heightened in an emotional state, and you know they feel they've been ripped off, or someone's done something really bad to them, and their immediate thing is, what action can I take against them? Often part of the service that we all provide is that we sit down and we talk to them, and in fact in many ways we steer them away from court in some ways in that initial thinking. And yes, there will be times when, you know, we can't get the two parties together to talk properly and to negotiate and to mediate, and maybe some things do go to court. But in my experience, and I'm sure in Sarah's and your experience, if people can come together and have a conversation and come up with a resolution that people both get to walk away holding their heads high, then that solution is a better solution for everybody involved, and it normally sticks, and people are happy, rather than going to court where somebody's going to arbitrate and make a decision that neither people might be happy with. So our job really is to try and bring people together to talk.
Fantastic. So how would people go about accessing your various services?
Well, I'll go off first. So if people like to use Dr. Google, they can just Google Consumer Affairs Victoria, and our website will come up, which is consumer.vic.gov.au. They can also email the Consumer Affairs office in Wangaratta, which is cav.wangaratta@justice.vic.gov.au, or there's a toll-free line, which is 1300 55 8181, or the normal number, which is 035723 6444. All of those details will be put up on the links later on, and we'll go from there.
Okay, and I see that, yeah, we now have the slides up for Hume, Riverina and Dispute Settlement Centre, and how to access them. Are there any other remarks that you'd like to make, our panellists, before we wrap up?
So I'd probably just mention that if anyone's on the New South Wales side of the border, there is an equivalent service to us over there. It's the Community Justice Centre. So again, if you're having trouble getting in touch with them, just contact us and we'll certainly try and refer you through, because the fire certainly didn't respect the border, and neither do a lot of the communities living along the border. It's one area for them. So yeah, there certainly are services either side, and I'm sure Michael could refer to people on the other side. Harley's very good. They cover both sides, so that's makes it easier for people.
Yeah, I mean, and also Gippsland's Community Legal Service, and also Shoal Coast Legal Service and Legal Aid New South Wales. Yeah, Google's probably your friend. And yeah, I mean, we also up in Corrion once a fortnight and in and around, but yeah, probably just calling the 1-800 number is the best thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And the same for Consumer Affairs Victoria. So we have offices across Victoria that people can contact. So, you know, down in Gippsland, who were fire affected, there's offices down that way as well. New South Wales Fair Trading over the border, they do similar services to what CAV does in regards to mediations.
And the other thing I just mentioned on behalf of Dispute Settlement Centre, it's not the best name perhaps in the world. We have people ring us and say, oh, look, I've been told to call you, but I don't have a dispute, so I don't think I should call you. It doesn't matter whether you call it a dispute, even if it's a difficult conversation you want to have with a friend, neighbour, relative, trader, whatever, we can perhaps talk you through how you might do that. You can have a bit of a practice and a think about how to do it. So we're not forcing anyone to have a dispute. It's very much about just trying to help people who are in a difficult situation.
I suppose the other thing that I'd like to touch on, and I'm fairly sure that the other guys might want to talk about this too in their own way, but CAV services are at no additional cost. And I say to people all the time, if you feel like you've been hard done by and something feels wrong, just give us a phone call and have a chat. And it might be that you know, just a simple 5-10 minute chat with one of our staff members, you'll say, okay, well, I understand that better, and it helps you to move on. Or it might be, well, actually, I do have a case and I should be raising this with the other person or the business that I'm involved with. So seeing that it is a no cost option, people already pay their taxes and it's funded through the state government, as a no cost option or a no additional cost option, come to us and have a chat, and we can give you some options.
Yeah, likewise, we're a free legal service. I hope I mentioned that earlier. And yeah, I mean, the message is much the same as well. Reach out more often than not. People, there's more that we can do than what people realise. So people's perceptions of what legal help might look like do often change once you begin to work with us. So thanks for the reminder, Michael.
No worries.
Okay, well, there's no further questions and we're almost at 4 o'clock, so we might wrap up now if everyone's happy with that. As I mentioned earlier, the link, the session has been recorded and the link will be widely distributed next week and sent to all registrants as well, if you want to pass it on to other people in your network who might benefit from the presentation. But I'd really like to thank Sarah, Harley and Michael for being our panel today for this discussion. There's some really great information there. As I mentioned, you know, if you do feel that you're having a dispute, or even if you know someone who might be having a dispute and feel that these services could help, please give any of us a call. If we can't assist you, we will certainly make appropriate referrals or suggest who else you might be able to call. So please get in touch. But yeah, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mark, for facilitating today. It's been fantastic.
Yep.
Great. Bye.